So this morning our topic is going to be our attitude concerning service to others, right? And I start out asking the question, should I serve or should I be served, right? So hopefully we'll go through this lesson and understand, our requirements to serve. But, first I think, why do I have to serve, right? What does serving somebody else mean? So I found a couple of definitions. It's not up on the board, but to work for, to labor in behalf of, to exert oneself continuously or statedly for the benefit of, or to do service for. I do like a definition that actually uses the word that you're trying to define in the definition, right? To do service for is serving. But there are really kind of two parts of the word that we'll look at this morning. In the New Testament, there are actually 4 different words in Greek that are translated as serve or serving. And we're really going to focus on kind of 2 of them. One is actually like a bondservant, right? A slave. And that's typically almost always translated servant, or bondservant. And then the second one is really the same word that comes from deacon, right? That gives us our word deacon. And that's one who ministers to others. And so those are really most of the time when we are reading any passages today, they come from those 2 kind of definitions. And by the context, you can kind of pretty much tell, which version of that word that we're going to be talking about. So I think first of all, why do I have to serve? I think we need to obviously establish that it is a commandment for us, right? So we're told to love our neighbor multiple times. And in Galatians 5:13 through 14, Galatians 5:13 and 14, it says, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." So how should we serve one another? Through what? Through love. And I don't think we can really serve anybody if we don't. We certainly can't serve them in the right way, right? If we're not doing that with love, right? And Matthew 22:39, Christ states, love your neighbor as yourself as well, right? But in Mark chapter 10, I call this the discussion of being first, right? So in Mark chapter 10, we have James and John, and they've come to Christ, right? And what's that about? That's right. They want to sit at the right and the left hand of Christ. They had somewhat of a good attitude because they didn't specify who should sit on the right versus who should sit on the left, right? They didn't go that far. They just said they just wanted to sit there. And so let's read Mark 10, verses 35 through 45, quickly. It says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, saying, 'Teacher,'" came to Christ, right? "'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask.'" Now, have anyone who has a child, right? or anybody who has been a child, so that should pretty much cover all of us, right? When you start out saying, "Are you going to agree with me? Just agree with me," right? And you're asking somebody to just, in the beginning, before you even tell them what they're supposed to be agreeing to go ahead and agree to it, right? So that's, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And so Jesus' reply, right? "What do you want me to do for you?" Then he said to them, "Grant us that we may set one at your right hand and the other on your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They said to him, we are able. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with you will be baptized. But to set on my right hand, on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those whom it is prepared. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. Now, why would the other 10 disciples, be bothered by this?
I figured the other two were trying to get a leg up.
Right. These James and John are sitting here trying to get ahead, right? They're trying to be in front of the pack. Right? I think we're still seeing a group of disciples here that are confused as to the spiritual versus physical nature of the kingdom, right? But at the end of the day, right, it's not going to be very successful in building a friendship and being, a group if we see that a couple of people over here are going off and trying to be the ones that are above everyone else, right? So the other 10, they're not very happy with James and John, right? But Jesus called to them, verse 42, but Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your what? Servant. Right? It's easy to get frustrated with somebody who wants to be in charge of everybody else, right? And that's, I think, what we see with the other 10 as they look at James and John. It looks like they're trying to get to a point where they're going to be in charge, right? So where does that really come from, I think, in the hearts of the other 10? Yeah, they're jealous. They kind of thought that they were going to be in charge, right? So there's a lot of unsaid things, right, maybe, that's going on here. But to sit here and have preeminence over others, it's like, wait a minute, that's not right. And what does it say about the Gentiles? When the Gentiles get power, what are the Gentiles doing? They're lording it over, right? They lord over people. Tell them what to do, tell them what they can do, what they can't do, right? That's how that works. I'm glad that it doesn't work like that today, aren't you? Yeah, that's not true. That is the way that still works today, right? Our rulers all over the world, some in much worse situations than we are in, right, will lord that power over the ones that are under them, right? Verse 44, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Okay? And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. All right? We by example here have a command, right, that Christ has done himself, right? He didn't come and take control. And we see this all the way through, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John when there's still a misunderstanding all the way to the end of what is going to happen, right? And the Jews rejected him because they kept thinking that he was going to take over, right? That the one who would come would be like David. What was David? He was a king, right? Physical king leading a kingdom here on this earth, right? So they are looking for that. And so the spiritual nature of the kingdom that exists, that Christ is bringing is not understood, right? So I have to serve because it is a command. If I want to be in the kingdom, and if I want to be even great in the kingdom, right, then I will serve. All right. So we also have other examples of Christ serving. No, you just kind of faked me out with your hand. It's okay. I'll come back to you. So we have many examples of Christ and his service to others. We should be working to be Christ-like, right? In Philippians chapter 2, verse 7, it talks about taking the form of a bondservant, but let's read Philippians chapter 2, and let's begin in verse 5, okay? Philippians 2, 5 through 8. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even to death on the cross. Right? New American Standard in verse 7 says he emptied himself. Right? So, what did Christ have before he came to this earth? Where was he? What was that? I'm sorry, David. Yeah, he had equality with God, right? He was in heaven. He was above this. He was there equal with God, and yet it says in verse 8, right? He humbled himself, right? He came down to this earth. He emptied himself, and the form that he took, right, was that of a bondservant, right? In Matthew 20, verse 28, it's also the same record that we just read about James and John. It says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many, right? In Luke chapter 22, verse 27, when Luke is recording the instance of the Last Supper, it says, for who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. Right? So Jesus came here and he served. And, at that Last Supper in John chapter 13, verses 4 through 17, let's turn over there. John chapter 13, verses 4 through 17. I have 1 through 17 up on the overhead, but we're going to skip down to really starting in verse 4. It says, it rose from supper and laid aside his garment, took a towel and girded himself. After that he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. So Peter says to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one who was betraying him, for the reason he said, not all of you are clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? If you call me you call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, wash your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. The example that Christ gave here at the Last Supper with his disciples there in that room, was that an example that says we should be washing each other's feet today? Is that what that's about? Are we going to take that literal? If they need them, right? But is that, are we wrong because we don't have people out here washing feet as they walk in the door, right? Is that the point? What does verse 15 say? For I gave you an example that you should also do as I did, right? He showed them how to serve. It is not about doing that particular act always, right? But that service can go all the way down to washing someone's feet if that's what it takes, right? So, and then I think why I should serve also has to do with the fact that I'm called to serve, right? So in Romans, there are several verses that show us that we're either slaves of sin or slaves of righteousness. And so in Romans chapter 6, verses 17 and 18, but God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered. And having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. All right? So we do have this calling, right? In Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10 talks about we are created in Christ for good works, right? Titus 2:14 says, who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself his own special people, zealous for good works, right? Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40, talks about the command to love one another, and it includes serving them, right? James chapter 1:27, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit the orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world, right? James chapter 2, verse 14 through 18, our living faith is demonstrated by how we treat others. James 2:14 through 18 says, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, right? Now think about that, right? Is that service? Go ahead, just be warm and filled. Right? Then, but you do not give him the things which are needed for the body. What does it profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, if you have faith and I have works, show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Right? I think we're called to serve, and James gives us a wonderful example there of, this isn't just about words, it's actually about actions. Galatians chapter 5, verse 13 talks about through love we're to serve one another, right? We've already read that verse. But through love we're to serve one another. Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46 really talks about our judgment and how we treat others by serving them is a factor, right? Matthew 25:45 says, then he will answer them, saying, assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. Right? Do we remember that discussion that Christ had? Sermon on the Mount, right? Not Sermon on the Mount, sorry. Matthew 25, he's talking about the fact that, there are some that will come and that will say, I was hungry and you didn't feed me, right? I was thirsty and you didn't give me drink. And the question was like, wait a minute, when were you with me? And when were you hungry and I didn't feed you, right? But, and as much as you didn't do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me, right? In 1 Peter 4, verses 9 through 10, it tells us, and we studied this last class, right? Be hospitable to one another, right? So in verse 9 and 10, 1 Peter 4, be hospitable to one another without grumbling, as each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. All right. So So what are some of the characteristics that I should have as a servant, right? So we're commanded to serve, and we should, but now how should I do that, right? And so I think we should put others' needs first, right? In Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 4, what does it tell us about our attitude when we serve? Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. So, selfish ambition. So, when we serve others, is it about ourselves or is it about the one that we're serving, right? Selfish or selfless, right? So, if our attitude is one that is not selfless, right, then are we really putting others' needs above our own, right? And we can't ask ourselves, what am I going to get out of this? Right? That's not the way that we serve. In Luke 17, verses 7 through 10, and which of you having a servant plowing or tending sheep will say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and sit down to eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper and gird yourself and serve me until I have eaten and drunk, and afterwards you will eat and drink? Does he think that servant because he did the things that were commanded of him? I think not. So likewise, you, when you have done all those things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what it is our duty to do. That's Christ in Luke 17, right? Shows us the example that here's one who he was out in the field, he worked all day, and all, right? What was his reward? Oh, well, you just come on in here and let me prepare a meal for you. Is that what the master says? No. He goes to his next duty, right? Is our character one that says, look at all that I have done and all that I have worked with, right? And now I deserve something out of this. I mean, have you ever thought that? I have. Is that right? No. We grow up here, I think, in this world, right, about, if I've heard the word that's unfair once, right, I've heard it a few thousand times, right? That's unfair, right? This is not the way that we should think, right? In one of the reference materials that I was using, it states that someone said that service is love made visible. And I started doing some searches on the internet about that, and I mean, it shows up in a lot of commencement speeches and all this as folks, try to implore those who are graduating from college or, about to move on to different portions of their life, and they're trying to implore them and tell them, this isn't all about you, right? You may think it's all about you right now, but it's not, right? Service is love made visible. And isn't that exactly what James told us, right? In James 2, verses 15 through 17, right? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, right? So we need to put others' needs first, and we have to be selfless in that act, right? So what's another characteristic of a servant? And this one's tough, right? You have to be prepared to be inconvenienced, right? When you're being a servant to others, right? When you're providing help and assistance and serving others, are you always going to do what you want to do? Is that what it is? You show up to somebody's house and, they need, their house cleaned, or they need a meal cooked for them, or they need all this, but but you really just came to, wash a couple of dishes and then head out, right? Is that the way that we serve others? We have to be prepared to be inconvenienced, right? Helping others can take time and effort. And in Luke 10, verses 30 through 35, we'll read that. Luke 10, 30 through 35, right? It's a story of the Good Samaritan, right? Many of us know this story. Sorry. Then Jesus answered and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come, I will repay you. What do we see as an example of the priest and the Levite? They're probably on their way somewhere, right? They were busy. They had a plan. Here's somebody. They're hurt. They're beat. They're laid over here at the side of the road. And, could they be inconvenienced? So who was inconvenienced, right? A Samaritan that came and he took care of that problem. He served the one who was beaten, right? Philippians 2, verses 7 and 8, it talks about, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. We've already read that, right? What did Christ do? He came down and he did that for us, right? So I think another characteristic of a servant is, I hit everything except what I want to do. There we go. To serve in unnoticeable ways, right? So in Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, we see Jesus talking about, take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. What's our reward for being a servant? Well, if we want to make it that everybody knows exactly how good we are, right? Notify everyone of everything that we've done so that everybody can pat us on the back, right? Then what's our reward?
Something temporary.
Yes, right. Something very temporary, right? We'll get all the accolades. We'll get patted on the back, right? But is that the purpose of serving? Is that the purpose of being a servant like Christ tells us to be, as his example was? All right. So, verse 3, but when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. You know, I think that many times the acts of individual Christians are not known by others, right? I can think of examples here in this congregation where there are things that people have done that other people do not know, right? And they may never know. I'll say that, one of the things that surprises me is when I go to a funeral and I begin to hear people saying things that that person has done, right? Is that the right attitude? Or was it way more important for everybody when they were alive to know what that person did? Right? So, I would say that there are some things that are done in a public way and that gets recognized. But is that really our driving force? Right? Now, there are going to be times where somebody is recognized and that's fine, right? But if we're only worried about doing things that are going to be recognized by others, then where is our attitude there, right? Is that shining the light on self and making sure that everyone else knows about what I think and what I'm doing, right? So, what's the nature of our service to God, right? Jesus' example here on this earth was pure and devoted to everyone, right? And it can be easy to get wrapped up in yourself about what I want, about what I need, about what I deserve, right? What does this society that we live in today tell us about how we should act, right? How about, if it feels good, do it. We've heard that, right? If it feels good, just go ahead and do that, right? And looking out for number one. In Matthew chapter 23, if we flip over to Matthew chapter 23, we're coming to a close here. Verses 5 through 12. It says, "But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best places at the feast, the best seats in the synagogue, greetings in the marketplace, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. Do not call anyone on this earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself will be humbled. And he who humbles himself will be exalted." In 3 John, verses 9 through 11, John writes, "I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us." Is that a servant? What does Diotrephes love? He wants to be, he wants to have all the preeminence in front of them. "Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does, prating against us with malicious words, and not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God." So in our service, we should imitate Christ, right? Remember that God sees as great, remember what God sees as great is love that's manifested in service to others, right? Mark 10, verse 44. "And whoever of you desires to be the first shall be the slave of all." So what are some ways in the last 30 seconds or so that we can actually serve others? What are some examples of how we can do that?
If they're sick, you can take food.
That's right. It doesn't have to be anything, major, right? You can take somebody a meal if they're sick, right? You can buy somebody groceries if you know that they can't afford it, right? Buy somebody medicine if they can't afford it, right? How about even just picking somebody up, taking them somewhere because they can't get out, right? Or they don't have a car, right? How about your neighbor? They need their lawn cut. You sit around and gripe and complain about the fact that they haven't cut their lawn, or can you just go and cut their lawn? Right? It doesn't have to be some large, great piece of work that happens. And then what about just sitting down and listening to somebody? Like y'all have done for me today for 37 minutes, because y'all haven't been talking. No, but sitting and listening. Sometimes, right, we know that folks are alone, and we know that they don't have anybody to really interact with on a regular basis. So can we serve them by just listening? Making a call, writing a card. Right? And then when we do that is is the next call we make and the next thing that we do to tell everybody about what we did? No. So, I ran across another outline. I think it was actually by Tracy, even though it was in a big stack of a bunch of other stuff, but Tracy Moyer's. But it talks about shining our light as we serve, right? If we're serving, we can actually cause others to glorify God, and it can also lead to opportunities to teach, right? And the statement's made, it is proven that the most effective way to reach others is personal interaction. When we serve others, it can open doors. And then we've often heard this quote, right? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right? So let's focus on how we can better serve and have an attitude that aligns with that of Christ. All right, so our next class is actually in 2 weeks. We have John Gibson coming in next week. He'll actually teach the morning class as well. And then Rob will start in on our attitude concerning time. All right? Thanks.